What's up, guys? Thanks for viewing my video here. This is my infographic for our class assignment, and it's regarding self-care, health, and trauma in American adults. The reason I picked this population, not only is self-care important to my life as a young adult, I'm only 24 years old, so I feel like at my age, I'm kind of coming to terms with what it means to be an adult and some of the common problems that you deal with as an adult, transitioning from more of an educational background to more of a vocational sort of daily life set here. And likewise, becoming like a young adult like I am now and sort of coming to terms with that, self-care has been instrumental not only dealing with the two jobs that I work in grad school right now, but also just dealing with daily life stressors that may present themselves. So some of the big ones I know I use, and I'll get into later, are exercise and, sort of like mindfulness type practices that I learned about in undergrad. And the reason I've been so broad with my, topic of choice here is because things like self-care, health, and trauma, something all three of those have in common is that they're widely applicable to almost everybody. Something we learn about, everybody has a certain standard of health they need to uphold. Trauma is extremely common, and self-care, isn't exclusive to just one type of people. So with that introduction, getting into the infographic here, as we see in the top left, self-care practices can aid in restorative efforts that extend from mental health symptoms or the exacerbation of mental health symptoms to more concrete physiological symptoms related to health, and that would be your blood pressure, things like heart disease can be curbed with proper self-care and mindfulness tactics. So, it's definitely sort of helpful in that regard. And then getting to our top right panel here of the infographic, the second, I put it at the top because I feel like this is really powerful, that something like self-care is, I feel like, just becoming mainstream. And on the top right here, we learn that self-care is a human right, and the themes of self-care can be found across a couple different articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the two I picked were Articles 24 and 25 because I feel like they have the most direct reference to sort of like self-care, but there are other ones that do. So Article 24 is more or less the right to rest and leisure and, reasonable workplace limitations on hours and stuff like that. So we're not going back to industrial age, sort of falling into a machine, losing my arm, and having to go to work the next day. And then Article 25, that one talks more about the health aspect, like we talked in the top left panel, that sort of standard of living that's adequate for health and the well-being of not only yourself but your family, because, something we know about displacement in psychology, if I'm upset and I have a bad day at work, a lot of people are probably likely to go home and displace that sort of negative feelings on, not only their wife or their children, husband, or so on, but, animals, and it's a common thing. So I think practicing self-care, like I was saying, is heavily ingrained in our society, and it's not just this new thing that's becoming more relevant. It's been around, it's just, I feel like it's just kind of becoming important now, the more, with the, more social change we've been pushing with COVID and changes in labor regulations between, stuff that's been going on now. Obviously, if you guys have watched the news, there's been quite a few protests and work-related boycotts like that. So it's been pretty interesting to watch here, a bit of a social revolution, at least I think so. So getting into the next slide, again, we talk about how common all three of these factors are. And 70% of American adults have experienced trauma in their lives. They've reported that. So if you're in a room with 10 people, 7 of them have been traumatized at least, to some degree. And I think that's pretty powerful because you never know who has and who hasn't. If anything, the minority hasn't. So this makes self-care all the more applicable with coping and dealing with daily stress. And, going in with that, our next one on the left there in the middle, trauma and stress have similar symptoms, which is true, especially physiological symptoms. Trauma definitely has a bit more diverse symptomatology, but stress is also a symptom of trauma. So they're interwoven in a way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So self-care reduces the risk of traumatization and vicarious traumatization, and it also reduces the risk of some subsequent re-traumatization. So that would be if you've been traumatized and you're being re-traumatized by a smell, someone saying something, and vicarious traumatization again. You're manifesting trauma symptoms by simply being around someone who's been traumatized, kind of like catching a cold. So, obviously, if we don't have poor coping skills, what happens? That's the natural next question. And in our bottom right panel here, right underneath the ones we just talked about, we see some statistics. 39.6% of Americans are overweight. That's almost more than a third. That's a lot. And that's not counting, that is inclusive of people who are obese and overweight. So it's from the overweight. If it was a spectrum, it would be from overweight to obese, like morbidly obese. So that's almost 40% of our population. And then going with that, 77% of Americans feel stress and symptoms regularly. So they're maybe shutting down when they get home, being a bit neurotic, stuff like that. So that's almost 80% of people. That's 8 out of 10. 80 out of 100. That's quite a few. And then 28% of Americans are physically active enough. And again, that's only a third of people being active enough. And so between that overweight and the statistic dealing with being physically active enough, that only leaves like 30% of the population between that, in that like gray area. So, it seems like it's a little bit bipartisan there. It's got two sides to it. So naturally following that, obviously these are manifestations of severe trauma or stress. So naturally the next step is what can I do with self-care? What is the effect of self-care? What is it going to do if if you come up to me and go, well, Noah, if I do self-care, what's it going to do for me? Well, it's going to reduce your stress, just like we talked about, improve your cognitive functioning, physicality, social well-being, emotional wellness, self-esteem, and a bunch of other stuff like that. And so some common ways to do it, and obviously it's going to vary more or less by which one of these you do. I have 15 below here: eating well, exercising, sleeping healthily, reducing stress, socializing healthily. I know that's hard for some people, but trying to have that self-awareness to know, is this a healthy social interaction or social relationship or not? Staying hydrated, practicing yoga, advocating for self-care policies, practicing mindfulness, like I was saying I was doing, setting aside time for yourself, which is a big one I'm trying to work on, meditating, not too great at that one, avoiding smoking or excess drinking, limiting sugar intake is a big one. We have a lot of sugar in our food as Americans, so I've tried to stay off as much white sugar as I can, no sugar added applesauce, stuff like that, and I found it makes a pretty big difference. And then the big one I think almost everyone needs to practice a little bit is learning when and how to say no, and especially in those workplace situations. Hey, can you come in Saturday? I know you requested it off. Well, no, I can't. That kind of goes past setting those boundaries and knowing when things overstep the boundaries and knowing how to be polite and just say no when, that sort of thing happens. And that's something I've been working on especially a lot lately. So yeah, obviously they vary. And, this has been an awesome presentation for me because I like the description said of how we're supposed to deliver this. This is an intervention. So the reason I did this like how I did it is I want this to be applicable to as many people as possible and inclusive to as many people as possible. Because like I said, trauma doesn't just affect one people or one type of people. It affects quite a few people, as we see. 77% of Americans feel stress symptoms. So that means almost 77% of Americans can benefit from self-care. And even if you're not feeling stress, you might be misreporting those symptoms. So the number could be even larger rather than shorter. Because I feel like it's a bit more reductive statistic than overly inclusive. So yeah, it's my presentation. I hope you guys liked it. I know it's been especially fun for me to do. I didn't think I'd like this presentation, but I loved it so far. So yeah, hope you guys liked it. I'm looking forward to seeing your guys'. Thanks.